Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. All right. Narada Muni is here, Prabhupada is here, Guru Maharaj is here, everyone is here. Okay, Prabhu, let's get started. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Savitram Prajapatyam Cha Brahmam Chata Brihattatha Varta Sanchaya Shalina Siloncha Iti Vaigrihe Savitram Prajapatyam Cha Brahmam Chata Brihattatha Varta Sanchaya Shalina Shiloncha iti Vaigrihe. Threats the vow for 1 year. Cha and Brahman, acceptance of the Vedas. Cha and Atha, also Brihat, complete abstinence from sex life. Tatha, then Varta, vocation in terms of Vedic sanction. Sanchaya, professional duty. Shalina, livelihood without asking anyone for cooperation. Shila Uncha, picking up rejected grains. Iti, thus, why, even though, grihe, in household life. Translation. Then the thread ceremony for the twice born was inaugurated, as were the rules to be followed for at least 1 year after acceptance of the Vedas, for observing complete abstinence from sex life. Let me read that again. Then the thread ceremony for the twice born was inaugurated, as were the rules to be followed for at least 1 year after the acceptance of the Vedas, rules for observing complete abstinence from sex life, vocations in terms of Vedic, professional duties in household life, and the method of maintaining a livelihood without anyone's cooperation by picking up rejected grains. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. During student life, the Brahmachari education was designed to encourage the student in becoming free from family encumbrances. Only those unable to accept such a vow in life were allowed to go home. Otherwise, would remain a permanent brahmachari, observing complete abstinence from sex life for his whole life. It all depended on the quality of the student's training. We had the opportunity to meet an avowed brahmachari in the personality of our spiritual master. And who's that? Om Vishnupada Shri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Goswami Maharaj. Such a great soul is called a Naishtika Brahmachari. Om Ajnanatimarandasya Gnananjana Shalakya Chakshunam Sri Guruve Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Upakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhuvya Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. A warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us for this morning's discussion. We're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 12, text 42. And this is an important text, and it applies to all of us. It's very relevant to our daily lives. And it is a good time for us to introspect, hit that pause button and introspect. And just to give you a little context before we get started, the title of this chapter is Creation of the Kumaras and Others. So, for the last several days, we've been discussing Brahma's creation in this material world. And so, today we'll be discussing the importance specifically around the topic of the Brahmachari ashram. Let me pause for a second here. I'm sitting in a different place. The internet connectivity here is a little sketchy. So I'd like to get some confirmation that you're able to hear me properly. Otherwise, I will make alternate arrangements. Can you give me either a thumbs up or let me know that you can hear me clearly?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, your voice is okay, but it was breaking a little bit.
It's breaking up. Okay.
A little bit. It's a little shaky, not too bad.
Is that right? But you can hear me otherwise?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Varsana Mataji. All right. So I'll cut through the chase and get straight to the point here. The goal of life is to achieve perfection. And perfection in what? Perfection in devotional service. So one who is intelligent will do everything to achieve this goal. Why? I mean, we all know how futile this life can be, even to the richest person on earth. Material ways of life are nothing but binding. I mean, they're full of bondage, right? They cause bondage. They are the very reason why we're still here today, even after millions of births, doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different outcome, or with the hope of achieving something different, is classically the definition of insanity. And that's what we're in. I mean, constantly, constantly in this mode of doing the same thing again and again, chewing the chew. If it weren't, just taking some examples, right? If it weren't for the chastisement of Dhritarashtra by Vidura, the old king of Kauravas would still have been not living but dying every day in shame in the palace of Maharaj Yudhishthira. This is post battle Kurukshetra I'm talking about. And Maharaj, out of his graciousness, out of his respect for elders, out of his love and affection, and this was genuine love and affection that he had, for his fathers, stepfather, even uncles, his family, his relations, for the elders. So in this case, for Dhritarashtra, in spite of everything that Dhritarashtra did. I mean, Dhritarashtra was partial towards his own son, starting with Duryodhana. But in spite of that, and with that, what did he do? He actually left everything unchecked in terms of Duryodhana's malicious attempts to kill, go to the extent of even killing multiple times the Pandavas, even while they were in exile. I mean, Dhritarashtra never, raised a finger and corrected his son. So, in spite of Yudhishthira Maharaj's, magnanimous and true affection for, his uncle was so great that, I mean, he respected him as his father because Pandu, his father, had passed away and passed on, and Dhritarashtra had brought up the Pandavas as his sons. But unfortunately, there was still this element of partiality, right? And because Dhritarashtra was so clouded. And Vidura says, Dhritarashtra, you're nothing but a dog living on bread thrown by Maharaj Yudhishthira. He was very strong. He didn't mince his words. He was very strong about what Maharaj Dhritarashtra was doing, and that he was doing it all wrong. He should have left the palace. He should have never have entered the palace. He should have been, really in a mode of atonement. He should have been in a mode of renunciation. He should have left and abdicated everything there and gone to the forest. Eventually, that does happen. Fast forward, that happens when senses are clouded. We are unable to give up, our material attachments, our material, the material benefits and the material comforts. And that by definition is called lust. We're driven by lust, and the world over is ruled by lust. If the way I look at it is, if our bodies are vehicles, then lust is the fuel. It keeps us going, and lust comes in different forms. People kill people over a few dollars. Back in the day, about 20 years ago, roughly, when Michael Jordan was in his prime, I remember, we were shocked to hear the news that his father had died, and he had not just died, he was killed. And he had just bought his father a brand new a Lexus Coupe, shiny little, vehicle, and his father was driving and making an overnight trip. And he stopped at a rest area to get some rest, to get some sleep. And there was a guy who broke into the car, and not just broke into the car, but actually shot the father, not knowing that he was Michael Jordan. I mean, leave that alone. But even by normal means, you would not kill another person. But just out of greed, out of lust, he picked up the phone, the gun, and killed Michael Jordan's father then and there on the spot. So it was a shocking piece of news for everybody. But that's just one of the trillion cases. People kill people over just few dollars. Just a few pennies for that matter. People over lust for power. What could be a better example than the Kauravas, right? They cheated the Pandavas out of their kings over a skin, right? So it is ridiculous about it. People go to any extent without even thinking about what they're doing, without even thinking of the consequences, without thinking about the impact that they're not only having on others, but on themselves and their families. People lie to people, to further their causes, for power, for wealth, for fame, for respect. Right? Country invade other sovereign nations just out of lust for gaining more natural resources, gaining more wealth, whether it is the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, or the merciless slaughter of innocent civilians by terrorist groups. That's happening everywhere. They're all driven by lust. And these extremists, the sad part is that these extremist groups even rape women, they kill innocent children, all in the name of religion and in the name of God. It's so unfortunate. And it just troubles me so much. Sometimes I think to myself, maybe in my next life, I should just come back as a vigilante. I tell Ruchira this. Maybe I should come back as a vigilante, superpowers, or something like that, and smash all of these bad people around the world. It really bothers me a lot. When I see this injustice being done, and people just madness, out of sheer lust and madness, senseless things that they do without even thinking about the consequences. So you would think that people like these, especially folks that are committing these crimes, would hit the pause button and think just once if they're really, really, really justified to commit these heinous crimes. But then again, history reminds us and tells us these kinds of events have been happening time and time and time after, since time immemorial. It's just been happening. People just go through all of those motions, whether it's impulsively or, after some meditation, they're just so hell bent on doing damage. And they're driven by lust to make these kinds of things happen without even thinking about the consequences. Now, think about those innocent people like us. We're not committing such heinous crimes, but we're all so caught up in our merry little lives, making merry little adjustments. We're trying to get ahead in life, never letting the reality of this illusion that keeps us from our lustful endeavors. I mean, it's funny, right? I mean, we're saying the reality of this illusion. We're living and surrounded in this illusory energy, but there is a reality to this illusory energy, meaning that we should recognize that it is acting on us. The modes are acting on us. We want better jobs, we want better homes, we want better cars, we want better spouses, we want better food. All we get, I don't want to have. Can you not make it any better? I mean, we're constantly going, through this diatribe. I mean, we're trying to always find something that is better. We're always complaining, whining, and all of this, if you look at it, right, we want better everything. Our grandparents spent their entire lives without a phone. I mean, phones didn't exist at that time, or at least even if they existed, they were only in post offices and in very special areas. If you had a phone at home, it was something that was great. But look at us now, this day and age. We can't even live for even a moment without looking at our phones, checking our messages, whatever it is. Everything is happening on the phone, right? So we're all so connected through the phone, and we're living living by these phones. And these are not just public phones. They're not just phones lying at home, but these are phones that are our personal phones. So even a little child, I mean, in so many places, you'll see even a child having a telephone a mobile phone these days. Life has become like that, right? And so it's almost like we're impelled by this force that is so subtle and yet so strong. And the Bhagavad Gita tells us in no uncertain terms that this pervasive and perverted force in this material world is powered by Maya. So this lust is powered by Maya, right? So what did the Kumaras do when Brahma asked them to propagate? So the chapter is creation of the Kumaras, right? We've been reading about it. We've been discussing, several of the devotees have been talking about the various aspects of the creation of Brahma. And in this chapter, where as it's titled, the creation of the Kumaras. And what do the Kumaras do when Brahma asks them to, go uh, create progeny? They were like, "Thank you, no thank." They just to stay as 5-year Brahma. So the Kumaras were absolutely smart. I mean, hands down, they were smart. Of all the lustful inclinations, sex life is the most captivating and the most corrupting and the most addicting. So the Kumaras recognized they were they had the fortitude that, by staying as and remaining as Kumaras, as brahmacharis, in other words, they could completely avoid and escape from, the cruelty of, the cruelty of sex life. And it, like I said, it not only drags us into the pits of human life, as Srila Prabhupada says, it makes us no better or no different than hogs and dogs, truly. And not only that, it also increases our attachment and identification with these bodies of ours, the material bodies. Over time, this becomes, or this makes us, and thus we really forget who we are. So the aham brahmasmi, right, that we are not this body, I mean, that just comes and goes only at a superficial level. But internally, we are so attached to our bodies, we're so attached to our material comforts, we're so attached and motivated by, lust, that we're completely lost in a sense. And it's like that itch, right? I mean, if you scratch an itch, that the doctors tell us never scratch an itch. Our elders tell us that too. Never scratch an itch, because the more you scratch, the more it gets worse, and the more compelled we are to scratch, scratch, scratch to a point that it starts to bleed. This drags painful. We get into trouble, are not good, or there is, even for people who have the knowledge, guilt kicks in. So it's a degenerative, it's a downward spiral, that is never good. And that's Maya at her best, causing us to be bewildered repeatedly, right? It's not just once, not just twice. It happens, as uh, my Guru Maharaj would say, it's that sine curve. It takes you up and then it takes you down. It takes you up and takes you down. It takes you up and takes you down. And it's like this um, paddle wheel that a hamster jumps on, and it thinks it's making progress, but it's not. It's actually running the same place and going nowhere. And finally gets so tired it has a drink of water, and guess what? It gets right back on that paddle wheel again. We're like that. We have a hard time, even though that's because we're so conditioned. We're conditioned from a very, very, very young age. It's like the male donkey that gets kicked in the face by the female, and still the male doesn't learn. The consequences are bad. Knowledge that we learn, that we're given, tells us that. But no, it's still something that we are driven. So sex life puts us more and more into ignorance, and ignorance causes suffering. Whereas the flip side is knowledge leads us to perfection. So going back to where I started, the most intelligent are those that avoid this addiction even before it starts at a young age. And since it is so addicting, it is easier to avoid this in the first place. And the earlier we do this, the better our chances of reaching, our goal. Now, what is our goal? Just to repeat, to reiterate, it is the perfection of life. Perfection of life is to recognize and to be able to engage ourselves in devotional service, of to the Supreme Lord. So doing this is something that happens, that's actually prescribed in the Vedas, prescribed in the scriptures. So we have the Varnashrama, we have the Brahmachari ashram. That is exactly what it's meant to do, to help the individual to get the mind aligned in the right, that is to abstain sex life, to abstain from anything lustful. So the brahmacharis were sent off, even as a child, to the hermitage, to be trained. And trained in what? In engaging in devotional service. So they were trained not to look at another woman other than as a woman, I mean, as a mother or as a sister, right? So the idea of sex life was never a part of their growing up. Their minds were instead engaged in devotional service 24/7, 365 until the age of 25. And when they turned 25, they would continue as brahmacharis for the rest of their life, as Prabhupada says in his purport as well, and then take sannyas at some point in time. Now, for the ones that went through that training and still couldn't handle it, for those folks, Grihastha life was recommended. But even Grihastha life was not like the Grahamedis, where they're still caught up in this cycle of lustful activities. But instead, managing their lives, leading their married lives, with regulation. So there was still some scope. It's not like only the brahmacharis will finally achieve perfection. Our scriptures tell us, our acharyas have shown by example that even as grihasthas, we can achieve perfection. We need to have that sincere intent, that eagerness to be, on the one side, to give up these lustful activities, but then also increase our taste towards, our commitment towards perfecting our lives. But the thing is, over the millenniums, we've degraded ourselves, so the traditional 25, 25, 25, the breakup of how life was meant to be and how people were trained and lived by example back in the day, back in several millenniums ago, has changed. It has degraded, millennium over millennium over millennium, to a point that we forget the primary cause of why we even beget children. In fact, we don't even just stop at that. We even promote the false pursuit of happiness through education, through well-paying jobs, and so on and so on. I mean, I'm guilty of that, right? Back in the day, we were, when I say we, in our past lives, the focus was on knowledge about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And what was real, what is true of life. We have thousands that profess so-called education and profess, the dissemination of knowledge. But what is it really teaching us, and what has it taught us, and what is it teaching our children? How to make more money, how to find more lucrative jobs. And unfortunately, the most prominent universities are, even called the Ivy League. I mean, it's ironical, right? That there are the universities that do a better job of distracting and actually diluting, and not just diluting, but misleading what true knowledge is, are given the highest respect. Now, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj was a true example, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport, of what it means to be a brahmachari. He took a vow of celibacy even at a very, very, very young age. He had a group of friends, and along with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, they all took the vow. And guess what? Maybe, based on my readings, most of them fell by the wayside. They couldn't hold on to their vows. But Bhaktisiddhanta, he took a vow and he stuck to it. He stuck to it. And he even dropped out of school. He, at a tender age, he took to reading the scriptures and mastering those scriptures to a point that he really could absorb and, extract the essence of the knowledge that he gained from that. And he made that an example by living his life like that. What is the true spirit of being a brahmachari? And how, one can actually stay away from the addictions and the afflictions of Maya. Now, for many of us, we may not have had the opportunity to have experience, the brahmachari stage, right? Because we were conditioned to go to school every day. And like I said, schools, teachers, no one really talks about true education, true knowledge. But like I said, there is still hope. We've gone through that. We are where we are. We should recognize that. But even now, it is not too late. There is still hope. We have Guru, we have Sadhu, we have Shastra, right? That can help, that can guide us, that can help us and keep us from, indulging in lustful activities. And how do we do that? Through regulation. Prabhupada has given us, regulation, regulative to this mind regulation, devotional service. We can not get over these lustful, but so in conclusion, we've all heard that famous verse from the Nectar of Devotion, Anya Vilashita Shunyam, Jnana Karmadhyanavrtam Anukulena Krishnash Anushilanam Bhakti Uttama. So, by carefully nurturing our bhakti, we can achieve perfection or pure devotional service. I mean, so that's the higher taste, because that is both the means and the end to what we're trying to do. Through chanting, through the devotional processes that we are given and told, by practicing. And it's never going to be a straight graph. We live in the material world. It's unfortunately a bad bargain, but we need to make the best of the bad bargain. And how do we do that? Is by continually engaging in devotional services through regulation and through practice and through constant. So help bring us up when we fall. We will achieve perfection. And Prabhupada gives us that assurance that we will achieve perfection. There's no doubt about that. And Krishna says that in no uncertain terms, even throughout the Bhagavad Gita. The message is, serve me. You don't to. You just abandon all the types of religion you have to back me. So with that, I'd like to leave us thinking, the takeaway is the Brahmachari ashram is very, very important. While we may not have had the opportunity to go through that ashram formally, there is still hope. We can still do it. And the way we do it is to achieve that higher taste. Automatically, the lower tastes fall out and fall away. And the effects of Maya, the effect of lust, is just no longer to be seen. It is something that we all have to aspire for and slowly see it diminishing. And we will see that as our love for devotional service increases, as our absorption increases, as we continue to associate with devotees and like-minded people, it will help us, stay focused on the right path and spend less time thinking about or indulging in some of these nefarious, lustful activities. So there is hope, and myself, all been conditioned. It is very, very difficult. It doesn't matter if you're a male or a female. We all are subject to the rules and the powers to be here in the material world. But even here, just as Prabhupada, where he was like a lotus leaf in a dirty pond. He was untouched by the dirt of the pond. Similarly, we can aspire to get to that point, and through regulation and practice, we can, if not in this life, maybe in the next life. Krishna says, once you take to Krishna consciousness, he will make all the arrangements, and he will make sure that we are protected. So we need to beg and stay in the shelter of our preceptors, in the shelter of Krishna, and with that, our life will be perfected. So let me stop there, see if there is any discussion. This is easier said than done. I may not have all of the answers, but this is, coming from my heart, and challenges that I've personally been facing throughout my life. So with that, let's see if there's any discussion and if there are any questions.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Very nice, very powerful class. And I was thinking that, a topic that's close to me is training children and in education. And how would you, because early on you had made this point that, we have our children sitting by the gadgets and things like that. So in the current scenario, how can this be done? Like, how can we train children? What are the key elements? Before they would go to Gurukula, there was undivided service, like a humble service, and that's it. So if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, again, this is something that we inculcate, and then, this is something that we've seen bringing up our own children, and we're continuing to see how our children are bringing up their children, our grandchildren. We, initially, Ruchira and I would think, just conducting what we were doing. So we were doing our artis, doing, our chanting, doing our reading, going for Bhakti Vriksha, sessions regularly, trying to offer bhoga and, having prasadam, all of these things, we were doing them. And initially we were thinking, we have to make it a very conscious um, action for, it to register with our children. And then later, artists, or they may be playing, they may be doing other things, they may be reading, they may be doing other things, but these are things that are constantly mind. But it starts with parents. It starts with, the association, the friends and the association that our children keep. It's very, very, very important. Yes, they have to go to school, they're dealing with different environment, have children who may or may not be exposed to anything close to being spiritual, leave alone religion, right? So it is and it's not like we have to tell them, hey, you need to do this, you need to do this. They're watching it. So that it starts there. And then as they get older, there is discipline, obviously, that we need to put in. I see my children, for instance, even when the grandchildren are at home and we're babysitting them, there is only that much time that is allocated to watching TV. And even if they're watching TV, they're watching only what they should be watching. So usually it is 9 out of 10 times it's little Krishna playing. So they're getting interested in the pastimes of Krishna through animation. So it keeps them occupied, keeps them absorbed. But again, that also is for a limited time only. And then after that, they're back to doing activities. So Ruchira personally sits with them, and she's working through puzzles and things like that. So the mind is working and engaged in constructive activities. Then we're reading stories, again, pastimes of Krishna or otherwise, and then that again keeps them absorbed in those kinds of activities. So where I'm going with this is starts with the parents. It starts with the environment that we create for our children. And again, we don't have to get too hard about it. We don't have to jump on it and push, because then there is that resistance. No, I don't want to do this kind of a thing. There was a generation right after, the second generation I'm talking about, that was exposed to this movement, to our movement, through the first generation that were direct disciples of Prabhupada. And there was a lot of dissension, and a lot of, the people that I've interacted with over the years, where they had completely, uh, what should I say, they wanted to really push back so hard that they actually got out of the movement. But now, as they're getting older and they have their own children, and lives have taken them in different directions, ups and downs, they actually see the value in what they had learned, what their parents were trying to do. Only thing was the parents were doing it a little bit on the stronger side. They were pushing them to comply. That push for compliance is something that we need to be careful. How we do this is very, very important. It's a very tricky, delicate situation. So doing it through example, setting the right example, and inspiring the children, getting them interested, giving them opportunities to do little things. I'll give you an example. Right? The environment in which our grandchildren are growing up, even for that matter, right? So my little fellow, Veer Krishna, comes home, plays, and we have a nice Pakistani neighbor who does all his mowing by himself. And my little guy loves machines. Anything that moves, makes a sound, he loves it, whether it's a fire truck or a school bus or even a lawnmower. So he wants to go, he runs over to my neighbor's yard while he's mowing, in the summer. And he loves it to a point that, he engages with my neighbor, and my neighbor loves him as well. So they had these conversations. So we saw that, and Ruchira and I, brought him a play lawnmower, which makes some whirring sounds, and it also throws up some bubbles and stuff like that. So he was so happy, playing around with it. And then this time he saw my neighbor with the lawnmower out in the yard. He goes running to him and he says, I have a lawnmower as well. And so, my neighbor's picked by that. He said, oh, that's really good. So you want to come mow my lawn? And he says, I'll even pay you for that. Believe it or not, the response was, my little fellow becomes, Veera Krishna becomes all quiet. And he says, Om Keshavaya Namaha, Om Narayana Namaha, with his eyes closed. And my neighbor is like completely shocked. He's asking us, what is he saying? He doesn't understand, right? He's saying, what is he saying? And it's almost like this little guy was saying, hey, I'm not interested in your pay, I'm not interested in money, I just want to do what I want to do. And so it was just a natural, a spontaneous response. Now, how did that happen? We didn't tell him to say it or anything like that. This is just a very isolated, it's an isolated example, but at least it gives you a sense, a feel for how an environment can actually impact a child. And as the child is soaking it all in, he may or she may or may not comply, but it's being recorded, and this will come back. So like I said, the second generation is from Prabhupada are now back in the movement, and they are actively practicing. If not preaching, they're practicing Krishna consciousness in their lives, and this recognize the value. So as our children grow up, they'll go through school, they go through college, they go through all the ups and downs that an adolescent goes through, as teenagers they go through, and as young adults they go through. But then all of this is being recorded and all plays back. So don't be overly worried. Set the right conditions, set the right rules. Discipline is important at some point. Um, in the right association, expose them to the right, the teaching of Prabhupada, and we have beautiful stories. Stories are very powerful. I'm a strong proponent of stories because we may not remember the principles, but the story itself is something that we will remember, and even as children, because I remember seeing Sampurna Ramayana when I was a little kid. I mean, just the imagery, seeing evil Ravana being completely vanquished by Lord Ram, and those bows turning into snakes, going through, and killing those Rakshasas and all of that, the fierce nature of the battle that took place, and how the good, all of these kind of sticking and these things we take with us as we through life. This long-winded response. These are some of the things that we need to keep in mind, and don't worry about it too much. Just keep them in the right environment and do what you're doing. Set the examples. I don't know if you could hear me. Anything else?
Thank you, Prabhu. I could hear like 90% of what he said, or 95%. Yeah, I mean, I was also thinking of, this teenage phase, but perhaps we can keep it for another day when I meet you in person or something like that. What did you do when you were older? Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah. Be their friends, Mataji. That's the best thing. When you act as parents, children tend to shy away, and they, start to keep things to themselves. You don't want that situation to happen. What worked for us the best, was that we were and we continue to be friends with our children. So that way we have an open conversation for anything, any topic. Nothing is barred. So any conversation, we're open. And we talk as friends, giving them respect for their intelligence, their individuality, their independence, and their views to life, their perceptions, and where we can guide them, we guide them. And then they use their intelligence to be able to apply what is right for them, and we're there to guide them. So in case they're going down the wrong path, even then, we're there to support them. So that's important. So being there to support them is what gives them the greatest confidence, and the trust that they have builds in their parents. So even through the teenage years, that's when they have this constant jugglery of trying, a lot of trade-offs. Do I do this? Do I do that? There's a lot of conflict. They're not able to recognize which is the right path and what to do at a given point in a judicious manner. So that's when we need to be there for them, be their guides, as opposed to being parents in the strictest sense.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Most welcome. Anything else before we close? I know we have 3 more minutes before Lakshmikant Prabhu tells me to cut the line. If not, thank you very much for being here on a Sunday morning and giving me company, giving me your association. And once again, I look forward to spending more time with you all again. Take care. Hare Krishna. Have a good week coming ahead.
Hare Krishna.
Vancha kalpatarubhyascha ardhavyacha pratitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namah.
Namo
Hare
Namaha.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Jai.